Welcome to my first ever review of any movie ever. So, The Batman, the movie directed by Matt Reeves, couldn't come at a better moment than it came out actually, with all these stupid things around us. Like I'm in Romania and Russia invading Ukraine just a few hundred of kilometers away from where I live, and all these bullshit things that happening around us. I was looking forward to a way to disconnect myself, and this movie helped in that regard a lot. And I can happily say that I find this movie to be pretty good actually. Now, this being my first review ever, I don't know how to do it. I don't have a layout on anything, so I think I'm gonna start off with the grade that I give this movie. Later I'm gonna justify why did I give this grade. So first off, if I would compare this movie to Christopher Nolan's trilogy, I think I would put it between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is still the best Batman movie that I ever seen, but these are subjective things, so you don't have to to consider my point as a fact. But I think that The Batman by Matt Reeves is a slightly better movie than Batman Begins, not by a large amount, but it is slightly better than that. Batman Begins being already a great movie, that in my opinion speaks volume on how good this movie, the Batman movie, is. At the same time, it is not as good as The Dark Knight. So as a grade, I think I would give this movie an 8.75 out of 10. It is almost a 9 actually, so I might change that grade to a 9 in the end. I'm not sure, but in the end I have some nitpicks with this movie, but they are overshadowed by everything else, which is pretty good. So the good things about the Batman are everything that you wanted to be a good thing about the Batman movie, like the story, the characters, the setting, and the aesthetics of a Batman movie. And I'm gonna start off with the story here. The story, as you saw from the trailers, you have the Riddler, which is killing people, right? And Batman needs to investigate those killings. And this movie adapted pretty well, in my opinion, the story of The Long Halloween. If you know that story, then you will find a lot of it in this movie. Not regarding the specific casting from that, because you won't be seeing characters like Two-Face, for example. It is a very good adaptation with the Riddler being involved in it, and it portrays the Gotham's mobsters far better than I would have expected. And that's that was a big surprise for me, because when you adapt a story like The Long Halloween, which has a pretty big cast of characters, here you don't have that large of a cast, right? You have only the Riddler as the antagonist, and I think from that point of view Matt Reeves did a pretty good job. It is also a little bit inspired by the Hush story, but that is not as big of a deal as the Long Halloween story. The characters themselves are good and well defined here. You don't have the Bruce Wayne persona as of now in this movie, which for some people this might be a minus, because as you saw from the trailers, actually the trailers themselves are a good representation on what you can expect from this movie. Like the Bruce Wayne is the Bruce Wayne that you saw in the trailers. It is not yet the second persona of the Batman's character. Like, it's not that facade of playboy billionaire or millionaire or whatever, I don't know, the Batman's fortune. But here we have a younger looking Bruce Wayne, which is a depressed one, and a one that cannot detach itself from the Batman character, while the Bruce Waynes from the other movies do. And that's not a bad thing in my opinion, because it is stated many times that okay, this Batman is in his year too and it is still depressed and so on. yeah, but the Batman's portrayal and the Bruce Wayne portrayals made sense in this story and in this setting as well. The other characters are good to excellent. There is a certain character that was annoying to me, the candidate for the mayor's office, which is the dark-skinned woman that you saw in the trailers. I didn't find that character to be that good as the other characters, which are excellent. Now, the aesthetics and the settings of the Gotham itself, which brings up the aesthetics of the story, is very good. When you watch Christopher Nolan's, for example, the Christopher Nolan's trilogy, his Gotham was pretty palpable and pretty real looking. You could see that Gotham as being a real city. You can do that here as well, but at the same time, the aesthetics of it makes it to look also a little bit comic booky, which is pretty great because in the end this is a comic book movie. But adding to that, I was thinking while watching the movie that this Gotham looks a lot, or made me feel like I was watching the Gotham from the Joker movie, which gave me the idea, at least at one point, that this might be a continuation of that story, which unfortunately is not. This is not a spoiler. They talked about this in interviews and whatnot, but the effect that the Gotham from the Joker movie had on the viewers, like the streets and the taller buildings causing an almost claustrophobic effect on every character and also the viewers, that thing is happening here as well. It looks overcrowded while not being overcrowded. There are a lot of stone buildings instead of glass buildings like in the Nolan's trilogy. This Gotham is like an evolution of the Joker's movie Gotham, and I like that a lot. I did not expect to have that feeling over this city. So the city is a character in itself and is pretty defined here and in a pretty good way. Moving on to the next topic, which would be the music. I think the tracks here, the official soundtracks, are good. I don't think they are better than the Hans Zimmer ones, but they give you this vibe of almost horror-like feeling. The tracks themselves have some horror vibes in them, and the music in other Batman's iterations is orchestral, is epic, whereas here the tone is not as epic. The movie itself is about the mobsters in Gotham and the horrors and the corruption that they generate around them, and the tracks reflect that as well. Moving on to the nitpicks, which, yeah, I cannot say or cannot necessarily point to a bad thing about this movie. All I have are some nitpicks that in the end made a difference for me, so much so that I would not give this movie a 10 out of 10 or anything like that. So I gave it an 8.7 out of 10, or let's say a 9 out of 10. I don't know. I'm torn between these two. So the first nitpick that I have is that at one point one character just mentions the term white privilege, which in my opinion shouldn't be included in Batman storylines like ever, especially in this movie where you have Commissioner Gordon as a dark-skinned person, you have the mayor candidate as dark-skinned woman, you have dark-skinned police officers and so on. You don't have the setting to include the term white privilege. I can understand why it was brought up in that point of the movie. It was brought up during a dialogue that came out of frustration feeling, but I thought that it was out of place. I don't know. It felt forced for a moment, but fortunately they didn't stick with it. They only mentioned that terminology once and then they moved on. Then the second nitpick is the ending. The ending of this movie is a little bit flamboyant. It is not as good as everything that led up to it, and it is a satisfactory ending. You might not consider it to be a bad ending, and or better yet, I would refer to the ending of the movie as the last 20 minutes of it. that part feels a little bit different than the rest of the movie. So that would be the two nitpicks that are not spoiling anything, and now I'm gonna give you other two nitpicks that they won't spoil you anything, but they might give you some information about a certain character or what's happening with a certain character. And if you want to see this movie fresh, I suggest you skip ahead up until you won't see the spoiler warning. But again, you can listen to these two things. The nitpick number 3 that I have with this movie is a very small one. It is pretty ridiculous, but I couldn't oversee it. If you saw the trailer, there is a car chase scene in which Batman goes after the Penguin. He catches the Penguin, but as you saw in the trailers, the Penguin wreaks havoc and explosion in the street and so on. At the end of the chase, Batman catches him, but in the end, for some reason, Penguin is... they let the Penguin go, which was not a logical reason to do, especially after he most certainly killed some people during the car chase, and they should have at least apprehend him and send him to a police station or whatnot. Anyway, that would be nitpick number 3, and nitpick number 4 is about the Riddler himself. During the trailers and also in the movie, he proves to be a genius with a little bit of craziness in him, right? He's almost like the Jigsaw from the Saw movies. You have a villain mastermind who in the end kills people, but while Jigsaw is not insane, this Riddler proves to be actually insane. He has mental issues, and that's negative point to me, at least, because I was hoping of having a serious Riddler, like it would be a criminal mastermind, but at the same time he would be sane, whereas in this movie, in the end, he's depicted as an insane person, not a sane one, and that was a negative point in my book regarding this movie. So yeah, that were the nitpicks that made me lower the score from a 10 to almost a 9. There is another nitpick with the dark-skinned woman that runs for the mayor's office. She does a stupid thing at the end of the movie. She doesn't listen to Commissioner Gordon, and yeah, that was she was a little bit annoying. Oh, I forgot to talk about Alfred. I think this Alfred is my favorite one from any of Batman iterations. Is not necessarily the best one, because again, that's a subjective thing to say that, oh, okay, this Alfred is better than the others and so on, but this is my favorite Alfred from, I don't know, some reasons that I cannot tell you without spoiling specifics. I'm looking forward to see more of him, hopefully in the future movies. Again, this is one of the best Batman movies, is not the best. So thank you for watching this review, if you watched it up until the end, and maybe see you next time.